Yo, what's up guys? It's DJ Web, and in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to set up my favorite audio tool, the DBX Drive Rack PA2. So, if you guys have been following my channel for a little while now, you guys know that I rock the DBX Drive Rack PA2 that I have right here for pretty much all of my events. I've had it now for over 3 years, and I've had it primarily in my custom built Pro X case over there so that I can control all of my audio and stuff like that. What you guys probably don't know is I actually own 2 of them. I have a second one that's actually down here built into this case. I have the other one out here for this demonstration. But I love these things. I own 2 of them. We pretty much use it for every single event, regardless of the size, especially on the bigger side, but we use it for all events just because it makes life really easy. And I know a lot of you guys see me using it, and a lot of you have purchased the thing, and a lot of you have asked me, how do I set it up? And I made a pretty crappy video a while back that kind of walked you through it, but in this video, I'm going to walk you through 100% of how you set this up. I got the iPad, I got all the tools that you're going to need to set this up to use for your events, for your audio system. Now, I quickly want to preference that the Drive Rack PA2 right here, really, this is overkill. It's 100% overkill, especially for mobile DJ events. You don't need it. I am a very technical person, as most of you know. I love gear, I love tech, I geek out over tech, I know my tech. But I will 100% admit that this is complete overkill. You do not need one of these if you're a mobile DJ, unless you want all the additional features and stuff that this has, basically the bells and whistles. Similar to if you're gonna go buy a truck. You just need a truck to take you from point A to point B. You don't need a ton of bells and whistles like a leather seats and a moonroof. And oh yeah, that's kind of also side plug. I have a truck channel where I go through my whole entire truck. Anyways, yeah, I got a truck, a Tacoma. It's got all the bells and whistles. Anyway, this thing is all the bells and whistles for a DJ setup. You don't need it. It's additional. It's not gonna make your system sound any better. It's just gonna give you more tools to manipulate your sound and make it sound the way you want to, and a lot of little tweaks that I'm gonna show you in this video. But I just want to preference that please do not think that you absolutely need one of these. It is complete overkill, and if you like overkill like me, then let's get on into the video. First off, I guess let me show you, this is the complete rack. I have a whole video on this. I just built it. It's super dope. It's got everything. It's got a Drive Rack PA2 in it. This big Yamaha 12 channel mixer board right here. Yeah, complete overkill for a mobile DJ event, but that's what I use. Now, the other Drive Rack PA2 is right up here, as you guys can see, and this is what we're gonna be using for this demonstration. I basically took it out of here so that way I can show you all the ports on the back because this one's built in. But anyways, this is the Drive Rack PA2, and I'm going to start off by saying one of the coolest things about this is that you can control it with your phone. It could be either Android or Apple, or in my case, we're going to be showing you on an iPad. I like the iPad because it's bigger, it's easier to manipulate, but I definitely have been able to use it on my phone as well. So to start off, out of the box, you will not be able to connect your phone or your iPad to the Drive Rack PA2 unless you buy a router. And it doesn't need to be anything fancy. This is a pretty cheap Netgear router. I'll link this exact one in the description down below. I've been using it for 3-4 years now, and I've had no trouble with it. But this is just a simple router. Like I said, it's a Netgear. You do not need internet, you just need a router that creates the network. Let me clarify that real quick because a lot of people get confused when I say you need a router with Wi-Fi. What we're doing is using this router to create a Wi-Fi network that we can communicate our device to the Drive Rack. We do not need internet. So this thing does not need to be hooked up to internet in any way, shape, or form. So you buy a router, you plug it in, you set it up with your network name and password, or you can just use the generic one that normally is on the bottom of the router normally. And then you want to take an Ethernet cable like this one right here, and you want to plug it into the back of the Drive Rack right here in the Ethernet port. And then you want to plug it into your router. Quickly, a common mistake is that people will plug the Ethernet cord from the Drive Rack into the internet port on the router. this will not work. You need to plug it into one of the slots on the hub. So plug it into the one right next to it. This is hard to do one-handed, but plug it into one of the ports on the hub. Do not plug it into the internet. It will not work if you plug it into the internet because, like I said, we're not using internet. We're just using the network. So you want to plug it into the hub. Once you've done that, we can now move over to our device. So now moving over to our device to use the app to set up our DriveRack PA2. First thing you want to do is download the DriveRack PA2 app. Now, this app is available, like I said, for both Apple and Android, and I'm showing you it on my Android phone because I can't get the screen recording to work on my iPad, unfortunately. So we're going to be doing it on the phone so that way you guys have a really clear picture to see the setup process. It's the exact same app, exact same everything, so you can follow along if you have Apple or if you have Android. So first thing to do is to download the app. I'll link down in the description down below where you can pick up the app yourself. Next thing you're going to want to do is, once you have the app downloaded, is connect to your router. And I will show you guys real quick that I am connected. If I go to my Wi-Fi settings, I'm connected to DJ Rick Web Network. That is this network right here. And it says connected without internet. Like I mentioned, we don't have internet in this situation. So now that we're connected to this router right here, which is connected to the DriveRack, we can open up the app. Now you're gonna be greeted with this screen right here. And on the bottom left right there, there is a link to a video that DBX themselves put out on how to set up the DriveRack PA2. It's a very monotoned video to say the least. And it walks you through the proper way to set this up. But that's all going to change because you and I are going to set it up the exact same way so that we have the exact same settings to work with. So to do that, what we're going to want to do is click on the wizard icon. Now, the DriveRack PA2 has way more features than even what I would consider. When I said this is overkill, this really has overkill features. So on the list here, you can click Run All Setup Wizard, which we're not going to do because Run All Setup Wizard has more features than what we could even physically use. You're going to literally get to a point where like you can't set this up because you don't have the stuff to do it. So just running through, if you clicked Run All Setup Wizard, it's going to run all three of the setup wizards below it, which are the Setup Wizard, which is the one we're going to be doing. That's where we set up the inputs. That's where we set up the outputs, the main stuff that we're going to be using. The next is the Auto EQ / Level Assist. This feature is very complicated, and what it does is it uses the RTA mic. So the DriveRack has a specialized microphone that you can buy for it, and what you can do is you can put this microphone in like the middle of your room, like in a front of house situation, and you plug it into the front of the DriveRack right here. And what that microphone is going to do is it's going to listen to what it hears from the speakers themselves, and then the computers inside the DriveRack are going to then adjust the sound to match the EQ that you set. So if you set an EQ curve in the Auto EQ, like it says, the Auto EQ, what the microphone is going to do is it's going to listen to the speakers and it's going to adjust the sound so that it matches that Auto EQ curve that you set. Very, very advanced feature. It sounds awesome in that, but it's a hassle to set up. One, you got to buy the mic, and it's complete overkill. You can set it to your ears like I do, and you'll be perfectly fine. And then the one below that is the Anti-Feedback Suppression Wizard. Now, this is a wizard that you can use to help set up, but you can also set this up manually just in the app itself. So like I said, for this video, I'm going to be showing you how we set it up. And what we're going to be doing is using the Wizard Run Setup Wizard option. So we're going to click Run Setup Wizard, and we're going to click Run All Setup. So we're going to set up all of these things listed below. Our speakers, our inputs, our graphic EQ, all the goodies that we're going to be using this for. And now the first point in this configuration is our inputs. For 90% of us, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be plugging in, there's two XLR ports on the back here, and these two are a left and right input pair, and we're going to be getting this input pair from our device. So for 90% of us, that's going to be our controller, our mixer, our mixer board, so like a 6-channel mixer board, a 12-channel mixer board, an S9, an SZ, an SX2, a Prime 4, a Newmark controller, an SB3. Your two outputs, your left and right outputs from your device, your controller, are going to plug into the drive rack PA2 as the input. Now, because we have a left and right pair, that is a stereo pair, so we're going to click on stereo. Next, this is how we want our graphic EQ to be set up. I always select stereo linked. Now we get to the speaker setup. So if you follow the drive rack or the DBX's video guide on how to set this up, they're going to show you the proper way. From the factory, it's set up to be very simple with a high, a mid, and a low output. So if you're running powered speakers and you have 2 speakers and 2 subs, you would set it up to run the high output as your 2 tops and the low output as your 2 lows. What I have done though is discovered a hack to be able to now use this. Instead of being high, mid, and low, you will now have 3 full range outputs that you can use for whatever you would like. So say you have your main setup with 2 subs and 2 speakers. So I want to run my high output as my 2 main speakers, and I want to run my low output as my 2 subs, and then I want to use this mid output as my 2 backfill speakers. So that way I can set up the mid output to be a full range output, the high output will just be the highs, and then the lows will just be the subs. Or say, even in a weirder situation, I want to run the high output to my subs, and I want to run the low output to my tops. The way I'm going to show you to set this up, you can do that because we're going to have 3 full range outputs, full range, that we can use for whatever we want. And the way we do that is by clicking Not Listed for all of the speaker options. I'm going to click Not Listed. I'm going to click 2-way, so that way I get the mid output. Click 2-way. Are we using subs? Yes, because we want that 3rd output. Again, we're going to select Not Listed for our subs. Now it's going to ask you how you want your subs configured, and this is a good thing to consider. So if your setup consists of 1 sub, so say you have a dual 18 subwoofer or 1 single 18-inch subwoofer in front of your setup all the time, click mono. That way all you have to do is run 1 XLR cable from the drive rack to that 1 sub and you're good to go. Or even in a case like the school dances I do where we run 2, 4, or 8 subs, I will still set it up at mono, so that way I'm only running 1 XLR cable from here to that first sub and I just link to the other subs. Good to go. But if you're running pair subs, so a sub on the left side of your setup, 1 on the right side of your setup, what you're going to do is set it up as a stereo output. Now you can also run a stereo output for that 1 sub in front. You're just going to have to run 2 XLR cables from the drive rack to the sub. So that's why you use mono, so you only have to use 1 XLR cable. Mono is left and right together in 1 cable versus separated. Continuing with the theme of this video though, I want to show you guys 3 full range outputs so that we can use the lows for highs if we want to. If we wanted to do 3 sets of speakers, like 3 different top speakers, EQs and everything, 3 full range outputs, we would click stereo. So we're going to click stereo, continuing with the theme of this video. Next we're going to want to select our amplifiers, and continuing with the theme, we're going to click Not Listed. Again, this is not really the most proper way to set this up, but it is the hack. So mid amps not listed, low amps not listed. Do I want to apply the current changes? Yes. So now it will go through and it will apply those changes that we just made to our setup. And you just saw on the screen right there it said setup complete. So we are all done and ready to go for the most part. So we're going to click Home. Now, on the home screen, this kind of lays out the map, basically, of how the audio travels through the drive rack and out the drive rack. So, going from left to right, I'll dive into each one of these features here in a second, but I want to show you guys how we set this up properly first before we dive into the additional bells and whistles that you got. But starting on the left side here, we have our input, our left and right input that comes from our device. The first thing it's going to hit is our graphic EQ. This is where we can set our EQ to make it sound the way we want it to sound. The next thing it's going to hit is that auto EQ. Again, if you're using the RTA mic, you can use the auto EQ to make your sound be a little bit better, etc. But for 90% of us, we're not doing that, so we don't use the auto EQ. Next is anti-feedback suppression. This is something that if you're using microphones, you're gonna love, and we'll dive into that in a second. Next thing is sub-harmonic synthesis, and this is basically a tool to manipulate your subs to make them sound better. I don't typically use it. It's just an additional feature. It's really just one of those overkill features. Again, you don't necessarily need to do it. Next is the compressor, and the best way I can describe the compressor is it protects your speakers against from idiots that like to redline the mixer. Next thing is input delay, and input delay is something that we're typically never going to mess with. It's similar to the auto EQ and the sub harmonic synthesis. It's an additional bells and whistles thing that you will not need to use. So after the input travels through all of those little features, it gets to the crossover. This is the important part. This is where those full range outputs come into play. So let's click on the crossover real quick. Now, as you can see here, we have a green, a yellow, and a red, and they're labeled high, mid, and lows. These are our 3 full range outputs. And the graph on the screen here is our frequency range and our dB amount. So on the left hand side, we have the dB scale all the way from -60 dB all the way up to plus 20 dB, with 0 being the big white line down the center. And from left to right, we have our frequency response. So it looks like 10 hertz all the way on the left, all the way up to 20 kHz on the right. So now we're going to modify these so that they are full range outputs. And what we're going to do is we're going to unlock the crossover, and it's going to say, warning, adjusting the crossover could cause potential damage to your speakers. And they're kind of right. If you are using passive speakers, you definitely need to know what you are doing before you start messing with the crossover. If you're using powered speakers already have built-in crossovers for the most part inside of them, so that they will not be able to use frequencies that they just can't use. So they have it built into most of the speakers. So there's a lot more forgiveness with powered speakers. So keep that in mind. If you're using passive speakers, you definitely need to know what you're doing. Powered speakers, you can get away with tweaking it, but I'm going to be showing you guys the proper way to do that regardless. So let's get into it. We're going to click OK. Now for this crossover setup, our high, mids, and lows, or our outputs 1, 2, and 3, here's what I'm going to be doing. Our high output is going to be going to our top speakers. In this setup that I'm going to be configuring on the crossover is going to consist of 2 top speakers with a center sub. For this crossover setup that I'm going to be showing you guys, the speaker configuration that we're going to be basically going for is that we have 2 top speakers and we have 2 subs, and then we have 2 full range tops that are going to be backfills, side fills, or in some other area where they need to be full range because they're not close enough to the subs. So this is the setup that I'm going through. I'm basically going to show you how to set up subs, how I would set them up on the crossover, how I would set up tops that are paired with subs, and then how I would set up tops that are out by themselves doing their own thing. Alright, one more thing before I start messing with the high and the mid and the low to modify it to the way I want. I want to kind of show you guys, or basically clarify on this graph, what frequencies are low frequencies, what frequencies are mid frequencies, and what frequencies are high frequencies, so you can kind of understand when we're setting up these speakers what we're looking to do. And on the screen right now, it's pretty much set up that way. So if you look here, anything basically above 3 kilohertz, so 3000 hertz right here on the right hand side in the green section, that is considered your highs. Now in the mids is a very large range because you have mid bass, true mids, and mid high. So mids cover basically everything from 100 hertz all the way up to 5 kilohertz. It covers a very wide range. Typically your main mids are found around 500 to 2 kilohertz. Those are like the main true mids. 100 hertz to 500 hertz is normally like your mid bass. Typically, don't take my word for this. I know audio techs are going to get me in the comments below, but this is the general conception. And then your lows in red here, all of your lows typically are normally around 120 hertz and under. Or 100 hertz and under. That's what's considered low bass. That's your where all the FUD bass comes in. So this was just to give you guys an understanding of, on this graph, where we're going to be looking for different frequency ranges. So back to my example, we're going to now set up our high output. The high output, or output number 1, is going to be those top speakers that are above our subs. And for that, I want to consider what is going to be my crossover point. So my crossover point is, where do I want my subs to stop producing sound, and where do I want my tops to continue producing sound so that they're not producing the same sound. I want my subs to take care of all my lows, and then I want my top speakers to take care of all my mids and highs so that they're not overworking trying to produce the lows that my subs are already producing. And for me personally, my favorite crossover point is 100 hertz. So that is where we're going to be setting up our tops. So I'm going to drag this high pass over to right around 100 hertz. Now on my low pass, I'm gonna leave it all the way out because I want it to produce all of our highs, all the mids, all the highs, all the way out to the right side of the graph. The third toggle below the high pass and the low pass is the gain. And this is something that you're gonna play around with when you're setting up your speakers. And the gain is what it is. It's literally how loud the signal is. You never wanna go above 0 on the gain. And basically the gain is something that is speaker dependent. So that's something that I'll explain how you set up for all of them here towards the end. But below the gain, we do want to talk about the polarity and the type. Polarity, you basically never want to mess with this. This is always set to normal. Now on the type, this is adjusting those slopes. So the slope you see on the left there, we can adjust by selecting different amounts. Me personally, I like to use the Butterworth style, not the Linkwitz Riley. It's a different type. Each person has their preference. I like Butterworth. That's what I'm going to be talking about. And for my highs, I typically like to go with like a 24 dB octave. So I want a 24 dB drop off. So I kind of want like a mid to sharp curve coming down. That's typically what I go for with my highs. Now I'm going to go to my mid real quick, and I'm going to bring the gain down to 0 so that way you guys can see the overlap that I'm going to be doing with the lows. So with the lows, this is our third output. This is what's going to be going to the subs that are underneath of the top. So again, we want our crossover point to be at 100 hertz, which it already is set. That's our low pass. And then for our high pass, I typically go with about 30 hertz. That's what I'm typically using. Now on the types here, you want to have a semi-gradual taper on the right side. I like to go with a Butterworth 12 on the right hand side of my low cutoff, and then on the left hand side I like to make this very sharp. So I'm going to go with a Butterworth 48 octave. So as you guys can see on the screen right here, this is the setup for the main speakers that we're using. So the tops and the subs. The subs are handling all the frequency ranges in red. So you can kind of see the amount that they're doing, and then they cross over at 100 hertz. So everything in green then is where our top speakers take over. And this is how a crossover works. And this right here, like I've been mentioning, is a 100 hertz crossover setup, or just a crossover setup in general. In this case, we're at 100 hertz. This is the same thing as if you ran your audio into your sub first and then you selected high pass out. That right there is a crossover as well. It does the exact same thing. This right here is just showing you what it does virtually, and this is how we set it up inside the drive rack. It's the proper way to do it. So this right here is how I would set up my tops with my subs for my setup inside of our crossover. Now I did mention we want to set up that second output, the mid here, the second one, as a full range output. So this is similar to if you just running two tops. These could be your two main tops, these could be two back tops. This is how I would set up the crossover for those tops. So let me up the gain real quick so that way you can see what we're dealing with. Now on the low pass side, we're gonna run it out because we want all the highs all the way out. Now on the low hand side, we don't want to go all the way out because top speakers cannot produce low frequencies, like low frequencies. If you look up the specs on your speakers, they will tell you what their frequency range is, and then you can set up your speakers accordingly to that. But in most case scenarios, most top speakers cannot produce frequency notes under 40 hertz. So for that purpose, I'm going to set my low roll off at 40 hertz on the mid setup for this mid speaker. So I'm going to bring down my high pass here to 40 hertz. 39, good enough. And then on my roll-off type, I'm going to click on the type real quick, and I'm going to select a semi-mid to shallow. I'm going to go with an 18 dB octave Butterworth. That's typically what I use. And that would be my full range output. So if I take the gain down on my highs and lows real quick, right there would be my full range setup for just running 2 speakers. And again, we're using the second output for this. And then our highs right here, these would be for 2 speakers on a 100 hertz crossover between the highs and the lows. So that right there kind of shows you how I set up my speakers inside of the crossover for running a speaker and a sub configuration and just a speaker in general. But like I've been mentioning, we have 3 separate outputs. So in this case scenario right here, I have this set up so that I can run my 2 top speakers, my 2 subs, and then I have a second full range output that I can send to 2 rear fill speakers that are running full range. And you can move those around too, like I mentioned. You can run the setup I had for the lows, how I configured the lows right here. You can set that for the high output, so it could be output number 1, could be going to your subs, and then output number 2 could be going to your tops, so you would set it up like the high. I hope that makes sense. You basically have 3 full range outputs that you can set and configure however the heck you want. Now, like I mentioned, I did skip completely over the gain to talk about the gain and how you set it up. I will talk about that here at the end of the video when we actually hook up the audio, and I'll show you how you configure it with speakers. So let's go back to home now that our crossovers are set up properly. So obviously on the right hand side there, we see our 3 separate left and right outputs, those highs, mids, and lows, or in our case 1, 2, and 3. Our top is the high, or what we're going to be sending to our tops. The middle one is the mid, or what we're going to be sending to those rear fill speakers. And then the third is our subs. Now, one thing I set up on all 3 of these outputs is the limiter. So I'm going to click on the limiter real quick, and I kind of have a general setup that I put on all of them. And what the limiter does is what it sounds like. It limits the sound and basically protects your speakers in a way. It's like the last bit of defense to just kind of keep it tame, keep the sound tame so that it doesn't overpower the speaker. Now the compressor is the first line of defense. That's the first line of defense to protect against people that are redlining the mixer. The limiter is kind of like that last little bit of defense to protect against where a song has like a really loud crescendo or a really loud peak in it, and it kind of tapers down to the normal level. That's kind of what the limiter is there to protect against. So I have a typical setup that I do, and that setup that I apply to all of my outputs is the threshold I put at -5 to -6 dB. I want like a 5 dB threshold, and then I set an over easy to 6. So that's typically right around there is about the setup that I do. So basically, if you kind of want to reference it, when I pull this back, you kind of see where there's the red and there's the yellow. I basically set it at an over easy of 6, and then I bring it up to the point where there is no more red showing, just yellow. That right there is typically what I'm doing for my limiters. Please feel free to leave in the comment section down below if you have a different setup. This is just the one that I found works best for me over the last 4 years of using the drive rack. I find that it's not too overpowering of a limiter, and it's just enough to do a little bit of protection and just kind of tame the sound a little bit, tame those high bits of the sound to basically keep the sound consistent throughout the setup. So that's the limiter setup that I use, and I'm going to quickly apply that to all of my outputs. And there we go. I have my limiters set up on all of my outputs, so they're ready to go. They're highlighted. That's one thing to point out. When a little segment over here is ever in white, it basically means that it is active and it's actively doing what it's supposed to do. If it's in gray, it is not active and it's not working. Alright, so with our limiters in place and our crossover set, we're pretty much ready to go with our speakers. Now, like I said, there's a lot of other features in here, like the graphic EQ, the anti-feedback suppression, the parametric EQ, alignment delay, and this video has got very long just talking about setup. And we pretty much have covered all the main aspects of setup other than setting our gains. So I'm going to end this video by talking about gains and inputs, and that's pretty much all that we're going to be talking about on this video. I will make a separate video diving into all the little itty bitty features, diving into alignment delay, diving into parametric EQs, and basically talking about all the other features of this anti-feedback suppression. I'll make individual videos for those specific topics. That way that this doesn't get too lengthy. In this video, I just really wanted to cover how you set up the drive rack so that you have 3 separate full range outputs. And to start off with our gain structure, the first thing we need to do is get our input gain set up correctly. And to do that, we need to start with our source, our mixer. So what I'm going to do here with my Pioneer DDJ S9, same thing for an SZ, same thing for any speaker, is I'm going to make sure that I am set up to produce a 0 dB signal. So it's nice and helpful on the S9 and the SX2 and the 1000 and the SZ that they have basically a little color readout. So what we're going to want to do is basically bring this up so that we are producing a 0 dB signal, and that is indicated by the first level of yellow on the S9 mixer. So right now we're producing up to a 0 dB max signal. So we are good to go here. We will now go to our drive rack to make sure we're configured properly for the 0 dB input. So if we check our drive rack real quick, you can see that it's only hitting about 10 dB. So if we check the input level on our drive rack PA2 here, it's showing that we're hitting about 10 dB of input level, negative 10 dB. 0 up here is 0 dB. This is negative 3, negative 10, negative 15, negative 20, etc. So we're hitting really low because we're producing 0 dB over there, but we're only getting about negative 10 dB over here. Now don't fret, there's actually a switch on the back of the drive rack PA2. Now in the audio industry, there's 2 forms or 2 typical levels of input. There is +4 dBu and -10 dBV. Now, I'm not going to go into all the technical details because honestly, I don't really know much about them. I've watched videos on them and it gets really complicated. I kind of understand it, but I don't. Basically, what you need to know is there's 2 different level inputs with audio. The most common form for us DJs, and this goes pretty much across the board, is -10 dBV. +4 dBu it's rare in our industry. So as you saw on the front, I'm hitting about -10 dB. So I'm not hitting the exact same. So that means I'm running the wrong input level. And if we look right here on the back of the drive rack PA2, we will see a little button switch here that indicates either a +4 dBu input or a -10 dBV input. Right now the button is out indicating a +4 dBu input, which is why we are not hitting 0 dB on the drive rack like we are on our mixer. So I'm going to push this button in real quick and we'll be able to go around to the front of the drive rack now. We can now see that we are ticking up into the -3, almost to 0 dB, very similar to what we are running on the S9 mixer back behind me. So our input's good now. Now let's talk about those outputs in the crossover. So now to configure the gain level output for our speakers, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to also set up our high, mids, and lows right around 0 dB. So now on the gain level for our crossover, what we're going to want to do is set them up also at 0 dB output. Now for me personally, I like to leave myself a little bit of a buffer room. So typically I set them up at right around -3 to -5. I don't like running 0 dB all the way out to the speakers. I like to have a little bit of a cushion room. So I'm going to go in now and I'm going to set up my highs at right around -3. I'm going to set my mids right around -3. And then my lows, this is typically where I go about -5. I like to have a little more cushion on my lows. And now that's where you set the gain levels initially on the drive rack. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to your speakers. So you're going to want to set up your speakers and then you're going to want to turn the gain knob if you have knobs. So that is where we set the gains at initially. Next, you're going to want to set up your speakers, right? So set up your speakers, and now if you have speakers that have digital readouts like the SRX series speakers or like the EKXs, I know a lot of the EV stuff has it now where you can set the input dB level. You're going to want to set the input dB level at 0 dB. Don't touch it. 0 dB, that's what I set my SRXs at. set it at 0 dB. Or if you have speakers with the little gain knob, then with the speaker set at 0 dB, you're going to want to basically turn on your audio, turn it all the way up to 0 dB, and make sure that your speaker is not clipping. If your speaker is clipping, what you're going to want to do is go into your crossover and reduce the gain. So let me just repeat that one more time. With something like my S or X series speakers where they have a dB reading on the back where it says what is your input level, I want to set it up at 0 dB. So then I play music, I play sounds at 0 dB on my S9 mixer on my SE. I put 0 dB there. I then have my gain output on my drive rack set to like -3 dB. And then I want to check my speaker and make sure it is not clipping. So if it is hitting limit, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my high gain here and I'm going to lower it down until I am not clipping, I am not limiting. And then that is where I leave my speaker again initially. Now if your speaker has a gain knob where you kind of just turn it to basically turn the speaker up, the gain knob, you guys know it's found on the PRX series speakers and stuff. What you're going to want to do is put 0 dB output on your mixer back there, -3-ish, -3 to -5-ish output on your drive rack PA2, and then you're going to turn that gain knob up until you hit limit, until you hit peak, and then you're going to want to dial it back a little bit, and then you're set and ready to go. Now that process right there is setting our maximum levels. Those are our maximum levels. So that is something you kind of just want to keep in mind, keep thinking about in your head. I know with my certain types of speakers, I know where my gain knob needs to be turned to be 0 dB. I know with my SRX series speakers, I know I have to have my high output about -1 to -3 dB to not be clipping. It's just stuff that you learn over time, but it's stuff that you can adjust on the fly as well. Now, I will tell you right now, I said that is our max levels, and I said that for a reason. A lot of times with our speakers, we get into rooms where we do not need to use all the power of our speakers. I know a lot of us like to blare our speakers, but trust me, with my SRXs, with my VRXs, a lot of times I do not need to play them at balls to the wall maximum level. So what I do is I set them up to their max levels, right? And then instead of adjusting the volume levels on the back of the speakers, I know they're set to their maximum levels. I will adjust the gains from the drive rack because I can do it live from my iPad, from my device in front of the setup. So I can basically listen to the setup in the room and then I can adjust my gain appropriately for the room. A lot of you guys have seen me at school dances where I basically go out in front of the setup and I'll basically be like, well, I set the tops at -10 dB for this room, and I set the subs at like -20 dB. That's because I didn't need to use the maximum power. The maximum power of those speakers was too freaking loud. So I dialed them back to the appropriate levels, but I used the gain feature inside of the drive rack PA2 because, like I said, it's very handy. So again, what I talked about there was how we set the maximum levels, and that's something you kind of just know and you learn over time based on the speakers that you have. And then at events, basically, you can adjust the gain level for that output. All three of those outputs, you can adjust the gain level to the appropriate level for that room, keeping in mind the maximum level, which typically is going to be around that -3 to -5, or you could set it up at 0 dB, so that way you know, hey, my speakers start clipping when I hit 0 dB on the gain meter right here. So I know if I go above 0 dB, I am definitely in the red and I'm clipping the speaker and damaging it. I know if I'm below 0 dB, I'm perfectly fine. And that's about where I set them. That right there, guys, is how you set up your speakers inside of the drive rack PA2 to be 3 full range outputs. Now, one additional thing before I go off the screen and I finish up this video real quick. Above the low, mid, and high, there are these little green boxes right here, and they're emulated here on the drive rack. Above them, they're also green. You may and you probably will see those turn yellow at some point during your events. Even during sound check, you'll see them start to turn yellow. Do not worry. This is normal. So It is a green, yellow, red system on the drive rack. Those limiters are there to protect our speakers. They're there to kind of just monitor the audio. Any little peaks, they kind of just suppress it down and keep it all good to go. If those green lights turn to yellow or they start to kind of flicker to yellow, that means that the limiter is doing its job. The limiter is active and it's doing its job and you're all good to go. Your limiter is there, it's doing its job, and you're perfectly fine. Nothing to worry about. What you don't want though is that limiter to turn from yellow to red. When it turns to red, that means that your audio is surpassing what the limiter can possibly do. This is a very bad situation. I've never ran into it, but it's something you need to monitor or just watch out for when you're initially starting to learn this stuff. It's not something that you will probably run into, just something to keep your eyes out for, because I know, at least in my videos early on, a lot of people were pointing out that they were turning yellow, and that's bad, that's bad. If they turn yellow, that means they're doing their job, they're doing what they're there for. It's just indicating to you that the processor is doing what it's designed to do, the limiters are doing what they're designed to do. If they turn to red, like I said, that's bad. Alright guys, that right there kind of wraps up the whole entire setup of how you set up and configure your speakers inside of the Drive Rack PA2. I am sorry this video is probably extremely lengthy, but that's what you have to do to go into detail on the Drive Rack PA2. And we didn't even cover everything in the Drive Rack PA2 because, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, this is overkill for mobile DJs. You don't necessarily need this, but if you want it, you can get it. I will go through all the additional stuff such as anti-feedback suppression, alignment delay, compressors, graphic EQs, parametric EQs in separate videos coming up, so that way I can dive into those a little bit more detail. But this right here was kind of a very lengthy overview of the bulk portion of why I use the Drive Rack PA2. Two last little points that I want to kind of harp on with audio, and I've made multiple videos on this. First rule is you never want to produce audio above 0 dB. There's a reason why on your mixer boards, if you have a color readout, anything above 0 dB turns to orange and then turns to red. You're getting into the bad area of audio. That's when you start to distort audio. Audio is designed to be played at 0 dB. That's when you are not adding anything to it. That's when you're not subtracting anything. Audio systems are designed to play back at 0 dB because at 0 dB you are not adding anything to it, which causes distortion. The second thing is, along the lines of 0 dB, you do not want to be limiting or peaking your speakers. That little light that pops up, you don't want that to be on. That light should not be on solid. It's okay if it kind of flickers now and then, but if that light is on solid, like your peak light, your red light, or your yellow light on your speaker is just sitting there on, that is bad. I hope this video was helpful to some degree. Again, it got really lengthy and I got into a lot of detail, but if this video was helpful, please slap a big like on this video. It helps a lot, especially with the whole YouTube algorithms and shit that are going on now. Hit the like button, it helps a lot. Leave a comment down below, that also helps a lot. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can see all the awesome videos that I'm going to be making on the Drive Rack PA2, audio in general, lighting, gig logs, all that fun stuff. I hope you guys enjoy it. As always, my name is DJ Rick Webb. Keep them records spinning, and I will see you guys next time.